Hello, hello. Well, one of those works. Hello, 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 hello.
So it's this one. So
Hello. Can you guys hear me? Hello? Well, I can turn that down. Okay. Moon River. Hey, don't get wild on me. I know you're. All right, we're just going to go with this, Chris. We'll figure it out later. But in your private prayers, you need to pray for whoever messed with the sound system, because I am not easygoing. I will find out who moved it, and I am so mean, you will not be allowed to. I'm serious. I don't care if it's a youth group or the bishop. You will never use that machine again, because there's a big sign, big letters I wrote, "Do not mess with a sound machine. If you mess it up, you'll never use it again." I'm not unambiguous on my... Anyhow, so now that we're done with that silliness of somebody who messed with it, is that too loud? Oh, good, because I barely could get this. So why don't we start in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Blessed are the clean of heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. Blessed are they who are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Glory to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. So, well, welcome back to Beatitudes Part 2. So, just jumping into this, we left off at the fourth Beatitude, which is, Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. So that asks the obvious question, what is righteousness? And it sounds kind of strange, because righteousness means right relationship between you and God and you and other people. But unfortunately, when people hear the word righteousness, they often think it means just to be moral, right? But it doesn't mean your private morality, like don't steal, don't cuss, don't mess with a microphone. Righteousness doesn't mean your personal morality. Actually, Psalm 112 says, the righteous man reweaves creation back to Eden when we live in unity. Isn't that a great, right relationship? Now, here's the thing. Right relationship means that you're willing, in the Bible, righteousness means you're willing to disadvantage yourself for those in the community. Oppositely, the unrighteous are the ones who disadvantage others so that they get a little ahead or get something. And so, think about this. In the Bible, the Pharisees are super, super religious. I mean, they're very scrupulous in their morality and their following things. But the shocking part is they're not righteous. So just wrap your head around that. There are many people you can meet who say, I'm very religious, but they're not righteous. So think about it. The Pharisees didn't lie, they didn't cheat, they didn't commit adultery. Once again, they didn't mess with a microphone system. But their personal morality was perfect. But they always took advantage of the community for their tiny clique, and they disadvantaged the broken and the lost in the world so that they could act superior. So have you ever thought, likewise, there could be Catholics who are super scrupulous about, the right genuflection and all this other stuff, but they're not righteous. They're super religious. Doesn't that just blow you out of the water, or is that just me? No, it's just me. So, I know this sounds strange, so I shouldn't tell you this, but I joke with a friend because his bishop, so I don't think you should talk trash about bishops, but I'm going to this one time. Because he's my friend's bishop, and he's very, very sweet man, very kind. But I always joke that he's Episcopalian. And what I mean by that, the joke is this. No offense to Episcopalians, but they're about to be offended. So there's this joke that this guy goes to heaven, and he's in heaven. And he asks St. Peter, he says, well, Peter, could I see hell? And St. Peter says, oh, yeah, I could show you hell. So St. Peter takes him down to hell and shows him the first room. And in the first room, there's all these people in eternal flame. And he says, wow, what did they do? And he says, oh, those are Jews who never shamad. They never listened to God or loved. And he was like, wow, that's horrible. Then he goes to another room, and here's these people being boiled in oil. And he says, wow, what did those people do? Oh, those are Catholics who never really loved. They never followed the law of love. Says, wow. Then he goes to a third room and looks in it, and it's terrible, the worst of all. It's people in eternal flame and being boiled in oil. And he says, holy cow, what did these people do wrong? And he says, oh, these are Episcopalians who ate the main entree with the dessert fork. And actually, this Episcopalian priest who I went through CPE told me that joke. And the reason why we thought it was funny, but he says, yeah, a lot of time with Episcopalians, he said that they are very, very English, eat the right dessert fork, all this other stuff, but that's what they're most concerned about. Now, I don't really think that's true with Episcopalians, but I do think that is true with some religious people, that they're very concerned about being prim and proper and eating with the right fork and all this other stuff. So they're very prim and proper and polite, but they're not necessarily righteous. And so I make this joke about this bishop, my friend's bishop, because he is very polite and very polished and would never eat the main entree with a dessert fork. But I guarantee you, he'd also never help the poor. He'd never do anything for anybody else. So this sounds kind of strange. He's religious, but he's not righteous. Does that make any sense? And so what Jesus is saying is that's how the kingdom of God works, is that's pretty shocking. Or have you guys ever heard, and I love her, so I know I mentioned her. Do you guys remember me talking about Hannah Arendt? One person. Why is it the bald people are always so much better memories? But so Hannah Arendt, she was Jewish, and after World War II, when they captured Eichmann, she goes and she wants to interview him and go to the trial. And she thought originally that Eichmann would be this, snarling, angry, Nazi, hating everybody. And she was shocked because Eichmann, before he was a Nazi, was a vacuum cleaner salesman. And he was prim and proper with pressed white shirts, white collar, very polite, very well-mannered. And she was shocked because she thought it would be this snarling, movie version of what a Nazi is. And she realized, here's the amazing part. Eichmann never cussed, I guess, in his life. Never broke a speeding ticket. He was always very prim and proper. Does that make sense? But he was not righteous. And so she had this whole thesis. It's great. She was just a brilliant intellect. And she called it the banality of evil. That the worst evil in the world is banal. The worst evil could be somebody who's in a very pressed white shirt, buttoned down, prim, proper, never cusses, and creates the most amount of evil. That's the banality of evil. Because you kind of think evil people are going to look like, bikers or something. No offense to bikers. But actually the greatest evil may be people who are not righteous. There's no connection between them and others. But like Pharisees, they're very prim and proper. And so righteousness is about community. Proverbs says that a righteous person does not withhold anything from others when it's within their power to act. The righteous live with this constant awareness of their obligation to community. The unrighteous don't take care of others. They don't take care of the poor. They don't take care of their elderly neighbor when it's in their power to pitch in and help. The unrighteous looks upon their many gifts and thinks, these are mine, I don't have to share them. With a great example of American history. Southern slave owners would have considered themselves very, very religious, devoted to Jesus, but they weren't righteous. They didn't care about the lives of blacks. Many non-Nazis didn't hate the Jews. They didn't hate Catholics that also died by millions in the concentration camps. They didn't hate the Jews or Catholics, but they were unrighteous. So sometimes the word righteousness and justice are interposed in English translations. Technically, it's not. But in one sense, righteousness really does sound a lot like justice. In the Gospel of Matthew, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus 7 times mentions the word righteousness. And remember, the number 7 in the Bible means something. 7 is a covenant. It's a commitment. So to follow Jesus, he's saying, is making this covenant with justice. So righteousness is a lot like justice, but righteousness is not the same as legalism. Because you also find a lot of religious people who are religious, and they'll follow the legalism, but they're not righteous. I think one of the seductions is canon law, that people say, well, according to canon law, blah, 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 blah. But they never miss the bigger picture of, is it even righteous? So, my canon lawyer teacher, I love this line, said, we study canon law, and there's thousands and thousands of canon laws. And he said, just remember, behind every canon law, there stands an idiot. And what he meant by that is that I really have to put up a sign that says, please don't mess the microsystem. So you just played with it, but the next person, it's going to take a half an hour to fix it. Do I really have to write a sign? If you're a really righteous person, we wouldn't need the law. Does that make any sense? You think, I better make sure the next person can use this. So righteousness can't be achieved through laws. Legalism does not create justice. Righteousness is a foundation for justice. Legalism often supports those in power. So often that legalism is often promoted by religious people who have power because it doesn't affect them. The problem is righteousness can't be legally outlined. So how do you know if you're really growing in righteousness? Because you really care for other people. Now, this sounds strange, I'm going to mention this, but righteousness also implies this idea of authenticity. So in one sense, the opposite of righteousness is somebody who is not authentic. The Pharisees, Jesus keeps calling them phonies. You're actors, you're hypocrites. Does that make sense? And you're not righteous. They can act very prim and proper, But underneath, he says they're dead inside. So somebody who's authentic, you really meet the real person. They really care about you. They're not just putting on a show of religion. Does that make sense? So righteousness also kind of means you're being a truly authentic person. So there's a blessedness in righteousness. So I just want to say, does that explain what righteousness is, or did I confuse people or lose them? I mean, I love that, because you can't really outline it by laws. You know, well, you don't know, but you know, if you're righteous, you know it, and you can recognize other kind of what is phony. But think about this. The blessedness is not in being righteous. The blessedness is hungering and thirsting for righteousness. The blessedness is not saying I've achieved righteousness. The blessedness is I want to achieve righteousness. Does that make any sense? It's the Pharisees who think that they've achieved it. They've followed all, they have it. The blessedness of the righteous is I want more and more and more. So that's the fifth beatitude. Next is, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Now this sounds kind of strange. When it comes to righteousness, I put colors to everything, but since it is being authentic, I always picture like yellow, the sunlight, because I like to pray with colors. But I pray one beatitude for hungering and thirsting for righteousness. To be honest, I also like the yellow because the Eucharist the wheat is kind of yellow, and I think it's really hungering for Christ. So pray that beatitude. The next beatitude, blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. To be honest, that's compassion as well, but when it comes to mercy, I use the color green because it means life, and I like that, so that's how I do. But think about this. When it comes to compassion, Jesus gives several parables of compassion is over anger. So now this sounds kind of strange. I mention it because today I hear some Christians say, I believe in the truth, and I will tell you the truth. I don't care how much it hurts you. Oh, please don't. That's not strength. That's just being mean-spirited. Does that make sense? Sometimes, maybe, but more important than that is mercy. And most of Jesus' parables are about mercy, more than being angry for the truth. So when Jesus looks at the crowd, this happens several times, and I love this. Sorry to get carried away. But the crowd will come, and the crowd is doing something obnoxious or wrong. And he looks at the crowd, and it says in the Greek, spliknomiza. My Greek is terrible. But there's this great Greek word that means, we don't have a word for it in English, but it's the word, I mentioned it before, that when you see somebody else in pain, your stomach just gets knotted up, that feeling in your gut. So the basic word is gut. When Jesus sees the crowd a couple times and they're really messing up, he doesn't have anger for them. He doesn't say, why don't you people get your life together? What he has for them is this pain of mercy. We'll translate it in English if you read in the Gospels, say, he was moved to the heart. But that's so hallmarky, it makes me nauseous. The Greek word has this idea of pain, that when he looks how lost people are, sees the truth of their mistakes, he doesn't get angry. He gets merciful. Shouldn't we be the same way when we see how screwed up the world is? Shouldn't our great hope be for mercy? Christ will come with a problem. Anger will not fix how messed up the world is. So, to be honest, I think this is greater than the previous commandment, because justice is giving other people what we owe them. But mercy gives to people more than what we owe them. Does that make sense? They deserve justice, but what we're supposed to give people is mercy. And so think about like Judgment Day. Do you remember the parable of the unforgiving servant? So in case you forget it, this one guy owes the king an astronomical amount, and he can never pay it back. In like 10 million years he could pay it back. It's just he could never pay it back. So the king simply forgives his debt. Except then that servant goes out, and so this is a really bizarre, it took me when I was a little kid, I didn't like this parable at all. When I say little kid, I mean like high school, because I got what it meant, that he was forgiven his debts. So he's set free, right? Then he meets another servant who owes him a penny, and he rails against him and throws that guy into jail. And so the angels, the messengers of the king, see this and tell the king. And the king goes to that guy and says, "You worthless servant, I forgave your debt. I showed you mercy when you had no choice. And you couldn't show a fellow servant mercy?" And then he throws that guy into prison. Well, think about, well, that confused me, because like if you say you've forgiven my sins, if you show me mercy, aren't I like, I'm out of jail, I'm running free to Hawaii, you know? And what do you mean I ended up back in jail? Yeah, because if you don't practice mercy as a way of life, you're still in jail. So yeah, God gives you mercy. We want to receive the mercy of God, but we must pass it on. Otherwise, we end up in this prison of anger. Does that make any sense? And so, like, I really love that mercy has to flow through us, not end with us. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. Or, you know, I'm a little obsessive compulsive about, I love near-death experiences, and luckily there are thousands and thousands of people who've had them, right? But you know what amazes me in the near-death experiences, when people go before the light? How does the light judge them on how merciful they were to other people, how much love and compassion they showed? And they're always kind of shocked, because the stuff they thought was a really big sin wasn't that big in front of the light. But the time that they weren't compassionate to that person or didn't show mercy to that person, they could feel the pain they caused other people. So I just, wow, okay, in the last judgment, I guess I might be there in purgatory for a while. And the thing about it is, I think mercy gives us a freedom too, because haven't you ever noticed people that are resentful always end up as victims? And so I mention this because I once was talking about mercy in a class, and this one woman, it didn't make for a great class. She said, "Wait a minute, you expect me to forgive and show mercy to the people who've offended me?" And I said, "I don't, Christ does." And she was honest. She says, "I was raped. I will never forgive that person. Because that person has really hurt her," right? But the rebuttal is this. Well, if you don't forgive that person, then you will end up in this prison of hatred. That's why the guy ends up, even though he's forgiven, he ends up back in this prison of his own anger. Does that make sense? Like, so people confuse, and I'll just mention this, forgiveness, mercy, with reconciliation. Christ demands we practice mercy. He doesn't demand that we be reconciled. So if somebody, like, this sounds kind of strange, this is my wall. If somebody's dangerous, I will forgive them. Who doesn't have people who've hurt them in their lives? I pray this beatitude every day, and I remember the people who have hurt me, more or less, and I do pray for them in this beatitude. I want to show them mercy. Now, here's the thing. I won't be reconciled to them because they're dangerous people. They'll take advantage of me again. Does that make sense? So the low bar is mercy. But, here's the real question. What is this person seeking? Do we want permission to resent somebody else who's hurt us? So, like, I would rather practice mercy. I may never be reconciled to that person, but I think one of our most self-destructive feelings is resentment. And, like, that woman had a lot of resentment, rightfully so. But yeah, I think if she doesn't practice mercy, she'll be in a prison of anger. And the problem is resentment seeps in so many. Resentment to a spouse or a parent or a boss or a coworker or an institution. And it doesn't rectify any problem. It just leaves you more isolated and anger. I just kind of think it's deadly. So remember on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, the measure you give will be measured back against you. How much mercy you show other people is how much mercy you'll be receiving at the last judgment. So yeah, I have people I don't trust, I think are bad people who have hurt me. But yeah, I pray for them every day in this beatitude. So, I mean, the opposite would, imagine Jesus saying to you, listen, you've really hurt me, and I don't think I can forgive or love you or let me back into your life. If Christ said that, I'd have no chance at heaven. Does that make sense? So now, I believe that there are valid boundary issues that somebody may have wronged you. Yeah, I'll show them mercy, but there is a boundary. But I'm not going to live my life in revenge or resentment. So Mother Teresa said, never turn your face away from the needy, and God will not turn his face away from you. So mercy is a way of life. And just, I probably oversaw this, but I love it. Lamech in the Old Testament, in the book of Genesis, so there's Cain, and then he's like a great-great-grandson of Cain. Lamech, his name, and I love this, his name is the word king spelled backwards in Hebrew. So think the reason why is that we were meant to be royalty. We are meant to have royal dignity. And Lamech is the opposite of royal dignity. He does a bunch of stuff. One thing, he marries a bunch of women because women are to be used. That takes away your dignity. Then he brags that an old man insulted him. No, an old man struck him, so he killed him. And he brags about this. And he says, a boy insulted me, so I killed that boy. Holy cow, you just killed two people. One because an old man struck you, and you killed a child because he insulted you? Like, at this point, you should be shocked. And he's bragging about this. And he said, because, background, I have to. Cain was concerned because he killed his brother that people would take revenge. And God says, I'll protect you with this mark. And anybody who seeks revenge against you will be paid back 7 times as much revenge against them. Don't touch Cain. So then Lamech takes that, which is God's protection to the unjust, and he turns it into a curse. And he says, if Cain got it 7 times, let everybody know, anybody insult me and hurt me in any way, I will repay you back 70 times as much pain. And he's bragging about this. At that point, that means, he's lost all his royal dignity that we had in the garden. So when Peter says, well, how many times do I have to forgive somebody? Like, the Jewish practice would be 3 times. And Peter says 7, which means that's a lot, right? And Jesus shocks him by saying, no, not 7 times, but 7 times 70. And the reason why Jesus says that is think back to Lamech. 7 means commitment. Lamech said 70 in the sense of violence and unforgiveness. We have to have this endless amount of mercy towards other people. I just love it. And I know I'll teach this, but you know how after baptism we anoint the child? And we anoint the child as Christ, priest, prophet, and king. But the kingly one means this royal dignity, that you have this royal dignity through Christ. And think about it, the opposite of royal dignity is Lamech, who spends his life in violence and anger and lack of mercy. Does that make sense?
Our real dignity from Christ at baptism is mercy. Does that make sense? And think about how different this is in Christianity versus like the karmic religions. Karmic religions would be Hinduism and Buddhism, because this sounds kind of strange. Hinduism and Buddhism, they're not really big into acts of compassion. There's not really justice. So this sounds kind of strange. Only with Christianity did Buddhism have these meditations on loving kindness. That started in the 6th century AD. But Buddhism believes in karma. So does Hinduism. So like, let's say Nancy, she's not good in this world, so she will be de-evolved back to like probably a chihuahua. And let's say she's not, sorry, chocolate. Let's say she's not a good chihuahua. Then she'll devolve back into like an earthworm. But I always think that's strange personally, because like, what's the morality of an earthworm? What's the morality of a chihuahua? But think about this. So if somebody, where you are born, like, remember in Hinduism, you'd be born as the upper class or the lower class. If you're born in the lower class who has to suffer, you don't show them compassion. Karmic religions aren't really big into justice. But think about this. How Christ says is that, no, our royal dignity is to show mercy to everybody. And so in the modern world, how did hospitals, feeding the poor, universities, how did all those start? Where are the origins of all those? Catholicism. There's no other history. Like now, the government does it, but in the Roman Empire, you had to be super wealthy to have a doctor. It's the Catholic Church that started hospitals and universities. Now institutions have overtaken them. But my point being is that, wow, we come from this long, we're the ones who introduced humanity to hospitals and feeding the poor. Different individuals throughout the world might have fed the poor, but you don't have a mandate in Buddhism or pagan religions. That was really shocking at the time. So I just love the fact our dignity is not that we have to show mercy, we get to show mercy. It's part of our royal dignity. Does that make sense, or did I lose people? Because, no offense, Dan Redline looks a little lost, so I'm not sure what. Okay, but seriously, pray that beatitude every day. Then, blessed are, and you get the translation, clean of heart. I don't really like that translation. Kierkegaard, famously, he was a great philosopher and religious leader, but Kierkegaard said, when it says clean of heart, and he does this great analysis, it means single-hearted. Single-hearted in that I have no other desire than Christ's heart. So when it says pure of heart or clean of heart, it's best to translate it single-hearted, because it's not about sex. And unfortunately, the moment you say purity of heart, people think sex. I don't know what's wrong with you people. But Christ had a pure heart. Nothing would distract him from the kingdom of God. Even compliments or suffering would not distract him. Remember, the Pharisees at first loved to go up and compliment him just as a way of throwing him off. And he would say, why do you call me good? He's not taking their compliments. So either compliments or scourging or death, nothing good or bad could distract his inner desire between, really, God and other people. So purity of heart is that idea that, I like that line, you cannot serve both God and mammon. So I just love that. Or, and this is just me, I'm weird, but have you guys ever heard of the Immaculate Heart of Mary? Okay. Dan didn't shake his head, so he's lost at this point. So, I always, as a little kid, I didn't really know what that meant. So, working backwards. A while ago, I heard this near-death story about this woman who was dying after childbirth, and she has a near-death experience giving birth to her child. And she said, she's Hispanic, and she said, Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared to me. And Mary appeared to me, and she says, when I saw Mary, I saw her heart, and behind her heart was perfectly aligned with the heart of Christ. And then Mary told her that she's going to go back and her child will survive, and it did. So, this sounds kind of strange. When I thought about that, I just love that image of the Immaculate Heart of Mary having your heart completely aligned with the heart of Christ. So that's what I like about single-hearted. When you hear the Immaculate Heart or purity of heart, single-hearted, that's what I think about with Mary. So without single-heartedness, without purity of heart, you can slowly be seduced to awful things. This sounds kind of strange. I knew this doctor in Boise, really nice guy, but he kind of got taken up with the good life, and he had to have the fancy car and the big house and all that other stuff. And I was shocked when he told me that he's massively in debt and worried about everything. And I remember thinking, it would have been better to keep your heart simple. Does that make sense? He wasn't bad or evil. He just let things become more important in his heart. Or I've known priests to do the same way. They start out as good priests, but then they kind of get blackmailed into other things that is more important, and they lose their single-heartedness. And so just looking at the mistakes of other people, I often kind of think, another way, this is me, have you ever heard fear of the Lord? I kind of like fear of the Lord, but I don't think it means, in fact, the Greek, it doesn't mean terror of the Lord in the sense of I'm afraid of snakes and bears and people who mess with my... it's not fear in the sense of terror or a horror film. Fear of the Lord is fear of loss of God. Fear that I will lose God, that I will... Does that make any sense? So that's how I interpret it. But that's a lot like being single-hearted. It's kind of the opposite. Fear of the Lord is I don't want to ever separate myself from the Lord. Single-hearted is I am going to work to be more and more closer. So I love that purity of heart, single-heartedness. And that's why, think of the doctor who got his life screwed up, not because he was evil or did bad things. He just let other things in his heart, or I've known priests, let other things in their heart that just become more important than Christ. So there's this line in the Bible I think about a lot because I have to admit, I play the lottery every week. And every week, God denies me. And it's not like I want things, but I do want. I have some friends who are struggling. I'd love to give to the church and give to my friends. That's what I'd do with the lottery. And get hair club for men. But in the Bible, there's a line that says, somebody was tested by gold, which I think is really a kind of a funny line, because if I was tested by suffering, I probably would do okay. If I was tested by gold, of getting everything I want, I don't know if I could stay single-hearted. Does that make any, I might become like the doctor or the priest. And when Jesus says, it's a strange line when he says, if your eye is sound, your whole body will be filled with light. And when that's at Mass, I'm sure everybody's like, I have no idea what he's talking about. But he ends with, where your treasure is, there is your heart. I think he's talking about being single-hearted. That your eye is focused on Christ. Your heart is like the Immaculate Heart of Mary, that it completely lines up with Christ. If that's the case, your heart, that's where your treasure is. So I don't mind the word purity as long as you don't think it means sex. I think by purity it means I have no desire for falsehood, for duplicity, anything else that takes me away from God. And this sounds kind of strange, but you know who I think lives out the
purity of heart the best, and you'll be shocked by this, is AA people. Because a friend of mine asked me to go to an AA meeting a couple times with them, and holy cow, it's kind of interesting. Honest to God, if you ever go, bring popcorn, because people get up and tell their stories, and they're very, like, I remember the first person, this woman. I really don't remember what was in her story, but I just remember it was so funny and shocking at the same time, like, no. And you're drunk and you did what? And like, I wish I had popcorn, because I was like, what? But here's the thing. Anyhow, she was given her speech, but it wasn't just a list of how she messed up. This sounds kind of strange. They had this purity of heart that they didn't ever want to get screwed up again. Does that make sense? They didn't want those. And I remember thinking at that first meeting, these people have purity of heart because there's no duplicity. Does that make sense? There's no judgmentalism. They had this kind of purity of heart. So stop at this one. Does that beatitude make sense to people? So I should play this game. Who do you think has the most, in your life, anybody think of anybody who has the beatitude? Because I said AA people. Who do you know has a purity of heart, singleness of heart? Anybody? Go ahead, Cindy. Oh, you'd say that's her beatitude? Interesting. Okay, so next beatitude. Blessed are the peacemakers. So this one is not really about pacifism, but blessed are the peacemakers. I didn't read this book, but I read a review of the book, so I feel like I can talk about it. But the name of the book is Nobody Wants War. Now, granted, I want to read it, but I have like 20 other books I'm reading. But Nobody Wants War is going over the causes of war. And here's the interesting part. It's so ironic when it comes to wars, especially the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire did never want to go in war, and yet they're constantly at war. And you have to say, that doesn't make any sense. Yeah, because there's this whole propaganda. We don't want to go to war. But then they start off, it's this common trait. They talk about their moral superiority. We don't want to, but we're good. And you know those Gauls, they're evil, awful people. So everybody always says they don't want to go to war, but then they do things that support the thinking that only leads to war. Because really, they do want war. And they do dozens of these little things, greed, the need for power, propaganda, that so builds up the people that with all this propaganda, the eventual conflict only needs a tiny spark. So it got me thinking, okay, so that nobody wants war, but they really do. And the opposite of that is blessed is a peacemaker, that they have no need for all these little tactics to exclude or create division or hatred. And the odd part is, it sounds terrible. I'm just going to be upfront. The opposite of the peacemaker is, just be upfront. My dad, when I was growing up, was an alcoholic, right? In case you didn't know. So it's the weirdest thing. To this day, I'm always amazed. So I'm junior high, and he'd start drinking. Now, God, I love him, but he had his problems. But he would start drinking and whatever. I was kind of oblivious. But then, I swear to God, it's like this sixth sense that all of a sudden your hair would go up in the back of your neck, and you'd know, oh, God, it's about to start. And it's you just get like 30 seconds before it starts. It'll come out of the blue, where all of a sudden the yelling starts, and he's upset about something. And it would have been a calm night, and he would have been, in his room drinking. But just, I always amazed. How did you know 30 seconds beforehand it's about to start again?
And I mention that because he was always, once he started to drink, he was suddenly, over time, he would just find something to be upset about. And I hate to say it, my oldest sister is the same way. I love her. She's an amazing person, but to me, she's kind of difficult because there's always a fight. Like the last time we're in San Diego and we're at a bowling alley and she's having a drink, and once again, it was like, oh, Jesus, it's going to start. And she told this story about a friend of hers whose little kid slapped his mother in the face because he wanted to be driven to school in the Lexus and not the van. I know. And when she told that story, I said, I can't believe it. And she turned to me and she says, so you're calling me a liar? And I said, no, I'm not calling you a liar. I'm just saying it's unbelievable. And then she says, right in front of everybody, you're calling me a liar. And I said, oh, we're going to do this again. This is what we're doing, where you've had a couple drinks and now you want to start a fight. That's a very Irish thing. And then one of my best friends and her parents and her brothers and sisters, I love them like brothers and sisters. Their children, I feel like, are my nephews. Their parents love their parents. And I especially love her mother. The moment I met her, I loved her. But guess they're Irish, and they would always have this family reunion. And one time they come back from the family reunion, and the father says, I will never go again. So my joke was, all right, who got rolled in dog poo? Because every year after the drinking would start, one brother, you wouldn't know who, but one of the brothers would get in a fight with the other brother and swear to God, year after year after year, they would find somehow a way to roll somebody else in dog poo. And so, I mean, it is kind of funny. So anyhow, she just had a family, her son just got married in California. So she called me to tell me how the wedding went. I said, did anybody get rolled in poo? Now, they stopped it years ago. But my point being is that the opposite of the peacemaker is, I know this sounds kind of strange. There are, it's my family background, people who just for whatever reason, they have a need to create division. Does that make any sense? The opposite of that is a peacemaker. To become a maker of peace, you're not only a child of God, but you see each other as brothers and sisters. You never want to see people anything else but your brother and sister. And so when he says peace, the actual word is shalom. And remember I mentioned shalom does mean peace, but shalom also should be translated unity. And so you want to create this unity. And so shalom, those who practice, who make shalom, make other people see each other as brothers and sisters, bring about peace. It says that you will be called the sons of God. Now, in the Bible, sons of God means something. In the Hebrew, son of God could be translated one who does the work of God. So son denotes a special relationship that the oldest son had work to do. And so what is the work of God? The work of God is to bring about shalom. So you spend your life creating shalom, unifying people, bringing about peace. To me, you deserve the scriptural title, Son of God, because you're doing the work of God. And so for you, who's an example who brought shalom into your world? And this sounds strange. When I was at St. Mark's, there was this guy named Grayson Badgley. He was, at that time, a fifth grader. And there's this one kid, really, really, really liked this one kid. But he was very funny. Not Grayson, this other kid. Very, very, very funny. But he would always do something in class to really play to the boys and upset the teacher. And so, but honest to God, I thought he was hilarious. Even the teachers thought he was hilarious. He was just a disturber. But so I had to talk to him, and this sounds kind of strange. I'm a liar. So I had to chew him out, even though I thought he was very funny. So I'm trying to come down hard, but he was very funny. And so I was like, why do you do this? I've told you, don't do this stuff in class. And all of a sudden, he was so crestfallen. And then I felt really bad. And I says, I just want people to like me. I said, yeah, but your humor, it upsets the teacher. And I said, just when you walk into class, do you know anybody who makes people feel good about themselves? And he says, oh, yeah. He said, Grayson Badgley. Grayson Badgley always makes everybody feel good about themselves. And when he said that, I was like, yeah, you're right, he does. Like, he's a great kid. And I said, well, when you're around your teacher, just think, I've got to be Grayson Badgley around her. Don't say anything that you normally say to the boys. Does that make any, like, but the more he spoke, I was like, Grayson Badgley is kind of a peacemaker. He just brings people together. Does that make any sense? Like, he unifies people. Or there's this great story about this 1986 detective in New York, Stephen McDonald, who sounds kind of awful, but he was shot 3 times by this 15-year-old bicycle thief who he tried to arrest. Gets shot 3 times and is paralyzed for life. So this sounds kind of strange. This cop was Catholic. And once he became paralyzed, of course, that ends his cop career. You know what he took up after that? He would speak at high schools and junior highs, and he dedicated his life to being a peacemaker. And he said, no, I got shot, and I'm going to be a peacemaker. I want to make sure no other teenage boys do stupid things. And so he spent the rest of his life until he died going around to everything. Promoting forgiveness, promoting unity. But I loved how this peace officer becomes a peacemaker after this great tragedy. Love that. I think he is a son of God. So, yeah, pray the beatitude. Like I always pray one Hail Mary for every beatitude. Pray we become peacemakers. Now, I know we're a little over time, but started late because of that. So I'm going to continue. The 8th beatitude is the blessedness of persecution. That should strike you as strange. Blessed are those who are persecuted for the sake of justice. Blessed are those who suffer in my name. Well, I love that one. I know that sounds kind of strange, and I pray for that one. And I mentioned this before. The ways of Putin, the ways of Stalin, the ways of Saddam Hussein, the way of Caesar, it's always the same way to power. And they offer the world torture, pain, death, control over others. And if you challenge them in any way, they torture or kill you. So think about this. Their way to power is by the power of fear and pain and suffering. But imagine if you really took this beatitude, blessed are those who are persecuted, then the ways of Caesar and Stalin and Putin, it would have no power over you. I'm not afraid of death or torture because I love God more. And I love the line in the New Testament where it says about the Christian martyrs, love for life did not deter them to death. Isn't that a great line? Blessed are those who suffer for justice. And even if it's not persecution, remember at one point in the gospel it says about the Pharisees that they quote-unquote spied on Jesus. They want to find something to complain about. So finally, the disciples are going through on the Sabbath, field of grain, and they're picking off the grain heads and eating them. And they're like, you're doing work. Well, technically, that's not true. That's just called eating. That's not servile work. And Jesus basically says, you're crazy. They're hungry, so they ate. And Jesus stands up to the Pharisees. Now, he doesn't argue Scripture. He doesn't argue theology. He argues for justice. They have the right to eat. Stop harassing them. But after that, they decide, he has got to die. So it wasn't really a religious argument. It was an argument for justice. Jesus does justice and dies, but Jesus is the reward. So I just think that's kind of amazing. That I just think it's absolutely amazing that if we had the power of the blessedness, fear, torture, suffering has no control over us. Now, one of the movies I really liked was Hacksaw Ridge. Did anybody see that movie? I'm curious, who didn't see it so I can shame you? Okay. So if you love Jesus, you have to see that. Now, honestly, back me up. Wasn't that one of the greatest movies of that year? And, you know, the Hacksaw Ridge, it's about this military chaplain who was it World War II? World War II, who he really is the blessedness of those who are persecuted. He goes back like 100 times in the middle of a battle to pull out all these wounded soldiers. He would not stop, and it was so great, and he'd be tired. He'd say, okay, just one more. And he'd run and get somebody else right into gunfire. Could you imagine, what if you had a whole billions of people who claim to love Christ, who aren't afraid of pain and suffering? Isn't that kind of amazing? And here's the thing. There's this article of this Englishman living in Japan who said he believes suffering matures you. And he says doctors, he knows in the United States, would pay anything, do anything to get out of suffering. And he said he's living in this Buddhist country, and the Buddhists are more comfortable with suffering than supposed Christians in the United States. You know, but yet, if we really follow Christ, why would we be afraid of suffering? It doesn't make any sense. You know, one of the reasons there's this history of the church, a brief history of thought, where this atheist historian in this book says, why did Christianity just explode in the early church? Well, think about it. It's thrived in the early church because you could torture them, you could martyr them. They had no fear of death and suffering. They're completely detached from fear. And it made them incredibly attractive, even more attractive than the Stoic philosophy. So people wanted to become Christian because these people had no fear. If God is with you, what power really is your suffering? I mean, you will suffer, but you have God with you. Your future is beyond suffering. Yet, poll after poll, most Americans are terrified of suffering, and yet they claim to be Christ. I don't think they're real Christians. The martyrs, even like Father Stanley, who was from the United States, he didn't have to return to South America when his parish was dying, and yet he said to stay in the United States while my people were getting slaughtered would be a type of death. I'm going back to him. That's somebody who has the blessedness of those who are persecuted. Pain, fear, suffering, it has no control over me. I don't like it, but it will not deter me from what I need to do. Does that make sense? Could you imagine billions of people in the United States or even the world who had that blessing? Anyhow, so pray for that one. So now, I don't want to hold you too long, but I do this game where I meet people and I know I shouldn't, but I judge them. But I'm a Judge Judy. And I like to think, well, what is their beatitude? Does that make any sense? Like, because I think you need them all, because that's how the kingdom of God works. But I think different people have different, like Grayson Badgley, you know, he's a peacemaker. Your daughter, blessed are the single of heart. So I know it's kind of strange. I just like to think, what is people's main, of the 8 Beatitudes, what is their main one? And which one do you think is your greatest one? So only because we have a couple minutes. Anybody want to share? Yes, Catherine. Oh, yeah. Yes, you must have put that up. No, you can't.
Anybody else? Anybody want to share somebody they know with a beatitude? Yes. You! Could somebody key his blue truck outside? All right, so next class is, what's the next one? That's the Virgin Mary. No, seriously, I can see it. It's the Virgin Mary. So what she's talking about is that because the Knights of Columbus voted me Priest of the Year, so the guy came and did an article. Here's the thing. I was telling Gina, I don't, like if I had to do it over again, I wouldn't have said yes to it for this reason. And I'm serious. You think I'm kidding. That's a long story. Every time something like that happens, it always follows with bad news. In the sense that when I was at St. Mark's, true story, St. Mark's. Anyhow, we were in this book because we got this award, one of the 100 best places to worship in the United States. And in the book, we're number 10. So that's amazing. Anyhow, that's a nice compliment, right? Except afterwards, this woman comes forward and accuses me, this other priest, and 2 elderly deacons of raping her. Oh, yeah. No, in one sense, it's kind of funny, but in another sense, we had to get a lawyer. And then finally, she says, well, I just mean in general, the Catholic Church has persecuted women. So, but the problem is, that took time, now, kind of thing. So, same thing at Holy Apostles, where this crazy guy said I was at Starbucks fondling a woman. And I immediately told the guy named was Priest Joe Da Silva. I said, Starbucks? No, I do that at Moxie Java. And I was joking because I didn't think it was just so outrageous. And he says, no, we have to announce to your parish that you'll be suspended for 6 months for sexual allegations. Holy cow. Because once that's out there, it does not go away. So, of course, I'll let you a secret. I'm kind of mean. I truly am a mean person. So, wow. So I said, I guarantee you, Joe, you announce that at my parish and I will sue you. I will get a lawyer and sue you for defamation of character. You have no proof about this. So I said, you better get your proof first or hire a private investigator. And Joe, let me tell you, I know a lot of dirt about the diocese. You better hire a private investigator. You come against me, I will come against you. So they hire this private investigator from Nampa. Guess what they found out? The guy has this long sheet of being completely crazy. So he just makes up stuff. But they were that close to announcing that to my parish. So here's the thing, yeah, I'm kind of proud of it. I love the priesthood. And not to ruin it, there's crazy people out there who, some crazy could read that article and say, oh, I'm sure he's the one who, does that make any sense? So every time there's a war, yeah, but I don't do it for that. I really like it. What are you drinking? I am not the greatest priest. Anyhow, so next week I think we're doing, are we doing models of the church? Okay, I think we're doing models of the church. Models of the church means, just to explain it, they're in the Bible, and I do like this, so it's kind of a Bible study, but technically it's called ecclesiology, study of the church. So in the Bible, Christ, or God, both Old Testament and New Testament, gives 8 models of what a church is supposed to be. And you need all 8 models. So, I always say this, when people say, oh, we follow the Bible. And I said, really? Shouldn't you worship the way the Bible says to worship?
And because nowhere in the Bible does it say hold a rock concert. Does that make sense? Or there's a lot of stuff there. But likewise, nowhere in the Bible it says just create your own church. Nowhere does it say that. It actually gives 8 different characteristics of a model of a church. You could have one that's dominant, but you need all 8. And so if you claim to be a church, shouldn't you have all 8? And they're kind of beautiful, I think. So we'll do, I think, 3 or 4 classes on models of the church. So on that, please, when you leave, scratch Dan's car for messing up our sound system. Oh, Reflections on the Beatitude. This sounds, she wanted to know if there's a book, and this sounds kind of strange. I can't, because I can't think of one, but I can think of this one. There's probably many. I thought Megan McKenna had one, but one I really did like was called Bishop Fulton Sheen's Beatitudes and the Cross. So, all right, God bless. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Have a good day. Thank you guys for whoever made all the treats, too. That's excellent.